All right, everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods in for Peter. We've got only one more segment with Pat Buchanan, so let's get right into it. We're talking about his brand new book, the New York Times bestseller, Suicide of a Superpower, Will America Survive to 2025? Pat, do you think a Greece scenario is in our future, or is that an exaggeration?
No, I think it's Italy. Tom, I don't see how. Do you? I mean, take a look at the deadlock you got up on the Hill, the inability of the Congress. I mean, as we've discussed, I think some of these military bases are going to be shut, but the Congress is really resistant any real cuts in defense. And the Democrats aren't going to allow them to go after Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And the other great society programs are a huge slice of the budget, but they're not going to be touched either, and you can't touch interest. So what I see going down the road is that the deficit adds to the national debt annually until you reach a point where people are going to believe that the Americans aren't going to pay back their loans with the dollars of the same value that they borrowed. And I think that's correct. So my guess is we're going to be heading down the road to inflation. Rogoff said we ought to have 6% inflation, and I guess the fellow up at the New York Times, he says it only ought to be 4%, but I think that's the way we're going to go.
Yeah, that's usually the debate they allow us to have. Should it be 6 or 4?
They're going to take 4% of everything earned every year, huh?
That's right. All right, let's
shift. Country, huh?
Yeah, I know exactly. It's probably one of the safest ones on earth. Frighteningly enough. Let's shift gears a little bit because there's so many different topics to cover in here. You're talking in here about something called the diversity cult, and I can't believe this sounds like an un-American thing of you to say. I mean, diversity is our strength, and Americans have voluntarily embraced diversity. So what could you possibly mean by the diversity cult?
Well, what I mean by the diversity cult is the worship of diversity per se. What made America strong, for example, in our revolution, is when the diversity, the Quakers of Pennsylvania, the Cavaliers of Virginia, the Puritans of Boston, and the Scotch-Irish of Georgia and South Carolina, who didn't like anybody, they finally got together and said, we're not going to be able to win our freedom unless we're one, unless we're united. You know, what did Ben Franklin say? Let us all hang together, gentlemen, or we shall all hang separately. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. When you became one nation, one people under God, is when America became a great nation. What's happening now is we're importing folks from all over the world, from countries and continents who have never before been assimilated in the United States. At the same time, we've thrown out the melting pot. At the same time, the whole world has begun to tear itself apart over religious fundamentalism and tribalism. Now, this is an act of insanity, and I don't know why we're doing it. There's no doubt that anybody can be a good American. But if you take a look, Tom, and you get into sensitive areas here, there were two peoples of color here in America at the time of the Revolution. There were the American Indians. How did the diversity work out for them? And then there were African Americans who were enslaved and then segregated for 100 years, and it took us centuries to work together and tried to build us into one people, one nation, so that our ideas, our beliefs, our traditions, our history, our heroes, holidays, we all had things in common. And that's what we're losing. At the same time, we're bringing in millions of folks who have never been assimilated before.
But what do you say to people who say, well, it doesn't matter if we don't have anything in common. You know, we share in common a shared ideal, right? A shared commitment to the ideas of freedom and this and that. Doesn't that hold any water? Isn't this a nation dedicated to a proposition?
I don't think it does. I know that there's a neocon proposition that, we're a propositional nation. This is the right. Irving Kristol idea and the neocons. But the truth is we don't agree at all on even what the Constitution says. Does the First Amendment say you can pray in public schools? Does it say you can have a Christmas display on the mall? Does it say you have to have a mosque down there at Times Square? Or what does the Ninth Amendment say about right to life? It says nothing. It says nothing. The Supreme Court says it makes abortion on demand the law in all 50 states. We don't agree on our Constitution. We don't agree on what the word equality means. It used to mean equality of rights, constitutional and God-given. Now we say, people are unequal in incomes, and so we got to have to equalize them. So what I'm saying is we don't agree on ideas anymore, and that's not enough to hold the people together. And you take a look at what's happening around the world, Tom, all over the world. I think what's happening to America is basically a balkanization, just like in the Balkan Peninsula. People are moving away from one another and segregating and separating themselves ideologically, politically, racially, culturally, every way you can think of. I mean, it's not Pat Buchanan. It was the Attorney General, Elder, and the Orlando Patterson say that the self-segregation going on in the black community is astonishing, and social segregation is as great as it was in the 1950s. I can't argue with them. I mean, people in California, they show up at school and they're segregated immediately by race and tribe, and they get together in their own fraternities. And this is and what we're losing is the things that hold us together. George Kennan was right. America's coming apart.
Pat, we've got just 2 minutes left before I'll have to go to a hard break. So I'm going to ask you something that's an unusual and oddball question, but I think we are really in uncharted territory historically in the United States. So these oddball questions aren't so oddball anymore. Do you think in the next, say, 50 to 100 years, secession becomes a possibility? For whatever reason, do you think that is a plausible scenario?
Sure.
And in fact, you know what? I'll make you feel more comfortable. I'll say, I'll be John McLaughlin and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being zero plausibility, 10 being metaphysical plausibility, where would you put it on the scale?
Very high, 8 or 9, and here's where it will go. Not in the South or something like that. I think the American Southwest, when you have 135 million Hispanics here, which you will at mid-century with their numbers growing, I think the Southwest culturally and socially becomes as much a part of Mexico as the United States. And we will become truly a binational, bilingual country there. And those countries are breaking apart. And I think a real possibility that the United States could lose the Southwest for all practical purposes, sort of the way that Serbia lost Kosovo.
What do you think the likelihood is that all the different policies you're talking about here, and now we've got about a minute, what's the likelihood that any of these policies that you argue are really eating away at the fabric from within will be reversed?
Well, there's some of them. You can on economics. You can do a lot of things like Reagan did on fiscal policy and things. But you take the decline of Christianity, which is documented there, and the Protestant and Catholic alike. You take the birth dearth, the rise of deaths over births. These things have been going on for 35 years now in Europe and the United States. I don't see them turned around. I see them, if anything, accelerating. The Islamization of Europe, I think, is inevitable. And I think of the United States, the decomposition of our society is already well advanced socially, with the crime, illegitimacy, dropout rates, drug use, all these things. And the Hispanization of the American Southwest, I don't think we're going to stop them. I don't think, Tom, you got the Republican Party won't even talk about them. They're scared to death.
Pat, can you tell me in 15 seconds, are we going to see a Pat Buchanan memoir someday? Because that'd be something I'd be interested in reading.
Well, in my next one, I'm going to do my 8.5 years before the mast with Richard Nixon.
Oh, nice. Well, listen, Pat Buchanan, I really appreciate you taking...
Limitations has run out, Tom. We can write about it.
That's right. Thanks again, Pat, so much for being with us on the Peter Schiff Show. Pat Buchanan, everybody. The book is Suicide of a Superpower. Will America Survive to 2025?